Greetings, my friends. Sit ye down, and hear tales of the past, told by the ancient flame. There are many tellings of these stories. This one's mine. The Golden Apples of Idunn. It happened one bright morning when the gods had gone walking from Asgard. They often did so, for they delighted in walking through the airy heights, gazing upon the 9 worlds below, testing their strength and wit. On this day it was Odin the All-Father, silent Honir, and cunning Loki who travelled together. They strode across mountain paths and high ridges until their feet carried them far from the walls of Asgard. Before long, hunger gnawed at them, for the path had been long and the wind sharp. They spied a great herd of cattle grazing in a field, and, wishing no harm but needing food, they slew one of the beasts and prepared a cooking pit. Honir and Loki gathered stones and wood for the fire, whilst Odin chanted runes until it burst into flames. When the smell of roasting flesh reached its height, Odin tore off a full leg of the ox and took a bite, only to spit out the meat in disgust. It was still as raw and as cold as if it had never been cooked. With much confusion, Loki and Honir piled more wood on the fire to try and increase the heat. But no matter how long the meat cooked and how blackened the flesh became, it remained uncooked within. A voice shrieked from above, "Cert, the fire demon would not even warm that feast unless I will it." A shadow fell across the camp. A giant eagle had swooped down and settled upon a nearby rock, its eyes gleaming with a cold cunning. Its feathers were grey as storms over barren seas, and his gaze held the fierce hunger of winter. "And I shall will it, if you let me eat my fill first. After all, they are my cattle." The 3 gods exchanged glances. They were starving and weary, and the meat would never cook without the eagle's consent, so they agreed. The eagle beat its wings once more, and the magic that had been woven into the meat lifted. The meat grew tender at once, and gloriously succulent. The eagle swooped down with frightening swiftness next to the carcass and began to eat. The gods waited impatiently for the eagle to finish, and in a matter of moments he had. But he had also eaten the entire ox. At this, a spark lit in Loki's heart. His pride was wounded, and his anger flared. If there was one thing that Loki the trickster hated more than anything, it was being tricked himself. Loki snatched up a heavy branch that had not yet made it to the fire and struck at the eagle with all the fury a hungry god could muster. But the blow was ill-judged. With great speed and finesse, the eagle caught the stick in its claws, and in one screech of triumph, the giant eagle shot into the air, dragging Loki helplessly behind him. They were far too high before Loki realized his mistake, and any thoughts about letting go were quickly replaced with thoughts for holding on for dear life. Higher and higher the eagle flew, over forests and mountains, over the dark rivers that mark the edges of the world. The eagle took great care to only just fly above obstacles, so that Loki's legs were battered against boulders, scraped along cliff sides, and plunged into freezing lakes. His cries echoed helplessly across the wilderness. At last the eagle descended into a lonely, forgotten valley, ringed by jagged peaks. He cast Loki upon the ground, and revealed his true form, a giant, towering and terrible. This was Thiazi, a being of great cunning and greater malice, who held old grievances against the gods of Asgard. Loki struggled to rise, bruised and breathless. The giant loomed over him and said, "You struck at me, trickster, and so now you shall pay the price for that blow. But I offer you a bargain. Keep your life, and in return bring me something I desire." Loki, though battered, still held his wits. "What thing?" he asked, for he already feared the answer. A cruel smile split Thiazi's face. "Bring me Idunn," he said, "and bring with her a casket of the golden apples of eternal life she grows. With them I have strength enough to bargain with all of the worlds forevermore." Loki's heart clenched, for he knew full well the power of the apples. They alone kept the Aesir young and unwearied. Without them, the wrinkles of age would soon creep across their faces, and their strength would wither like leaves in frost. But Loki was caught, and they both knew it. The giant bent down until his breath chilled the trickster's skin. "Swear you will do this," he growled, "or I will fly you up into the sky, and perhaps this time I may not hold on." Loki feared death, but above all he feared torment. And so he swore. He swore by earth, and he swore by stone, and he swore by sky, that he would deliver Idunn into Thiazi's hand. Satisfied, the giant released him, and flew away. With a beat of his monstrous wings, he rose into the air, calling, "A month from today, Loki, in the glade outside Asgard, and no tricks, or I will drop you like an egg." And with that he vanished amongst the clouds, leaving Loki to limp back towards the land of the gods, with dread in his heart. For he knew the price of the promise he had made, and he knew as well that no oath lightly sworn could be lightly broken. Loki did not rest long after returning to Asgard. The memory of the giant's grip still clung to his bones, and the humiliation of being outmatched scraped at his pride like a whetstone on rust. Yet he moved as he always did, with the same quick, effortless stride, for he would never allow the other gods to see him shaken. Mischief might be his cloak, but dignity was the thread that held it together. Loki returned to Asgard with a strained smile, speaking lightly of his adventures, as though nothing of weight had occurred. He laughed off any attempts from the other gods to make fun of him, or to dig deeper into what had happened. But unease clung to him like smoke. He kept glancing towards the horizon, half expecting to see the giant's great eagle form come sweeping across the sky. And still he hoped, perhaps, that the matter might resolve itself, simply dissolving like frost in the morning sun. But giants do not release that which they covet. Thiazi desired youth, the supple glory that the gods themselves kept close and guarded well. And above all, he desired the keeper of the youth of the gods. Loki spent most of the next month trying to find some way to worm his way out of his predicament. But every plan he came up with had some flaw that he could not find a way around. He could of course not tell anyone of his troubles. One morning, a few days before he was due to deliver Idunn, Loki was in the kitchen when an egg rolled off the table and struck the floor with a sickly splatting sound. Loki winced and returned to bed. With no other option, just as dusk was starting, Loki wandered into the grove where Idunn tended to her golden harvest. Sunlight danced on the boughs, and the apples shone as though each one held its own dawn within its skin. Idunn greeted him as she greeted all the gods, with warmth clear as spring water. She was gentle in manner and young in spirit, and she trusted too readily those who stood near her. Loki, weaving lies with a tongue trained through centuries of mischief, bowed low and spoke pleasantly. "Idunn, keeper of all that stays our years, I have seen a wonder beyond these walls. A tree in the far woods bearing fruit, most like your own, yet perhaps brighter still. Come, and I will show you this marvel. We must compare them with our own eyes." Idunn smiled unsuspectingly. "For if there is such a tree," she said, "I must see it. None should bear fruit like ours, unless blessed with my virtue and care." "Perhaps a basket of apples too?" suggested Loki. "For comparison's sake, of course." So Idunn gathered her casket of gleaming apples and followed Loki into the forest. He walked ahead with quick steps, as though eager, though the shadow of guilt flickered now and again across his brow. At last they reached the glade Thiazi had chosen, and Idunn halted in confusion. "I see no tree here," she murmured. "Only the quiet." Then the wind shifted, and a deep rushing filled the air. The sunlight dimmed. Out of the sky hurled Thiazi, in the shape of the monstrous eagle once more, wings broad enough to blot out half of the heavens. Idunn gasped and clutched her casket to her, but she was no warrior and no spellcaster. Loki stepped back, his breath caught between fear and shame, but he did not lift a hand to aid her. The bargain he had made with the giant weighed upon him like chains of iron. Thiazi seized Idunn in his talons, lifting her high into the air. Her cries echoed through the trees, thin and forlorn, before the beating of the eagle's wings swallowed them whole. The golden apples tumbled in her grasp, but did not fall. She clung to them even as she was carried northwards to the stark realm of the giants. Loki watched the great eagle vanish into the long northern dusk, the flight a far one back to Jotunheim. Only then did he turn back and scuttle home towards Asgard, knowing the doom he had unleashed would soon fall upon them all. For without Idunn's gift, the gods would soon wither. Their strength would fade like mist on a chill morning, and age would creep into their bones. As the days passed without Idunn, Asgard dimmed like a hearth left to burn itself to embers. The faces of the gods tightened with age. Freya's golden hair dulled at the tips. Tyr's strong hands shook faintly when he grasped his spear. Even Odin, All-Father, felt the weight of years pressing on his bones. Without Idunn and her apples, even the greatest of them could not stand against time. In the high halls of Asgard, a council was called. The gods gathered, each heavier of spirit than the last, and the dimming of their youth was plain for all to see. Heimdall, the all-seeing one, was the first to speak, his voice rolling through the rafters of the great hall. "Loki led Idunn out of her grove," he said, "and brought ruin upon us all." One by one the eyes of the gods turned. All fell upon Loki. The eyes of Heimdall see all, and never once has he faltered in his duty as sentry of Asgard. Loki tried at first to laugh, but his voice wavered, for no one laughed with him. Their weariness left no room for mirth. Freya stepped forward, beautiful even in her fading light. "Loki," she said softly, "you alone walked with her that day. Why did you lead her beyond the walls?" Odin's one eye fixed upon him, a gaze that pierced Loki's soul deeper than any blade. "Speak the truth." Cornered beneath the weight of divine scrutiny, Loki found no trick sharp enough to free him. He bowed his head at last, words slipping out like a man confessing at the foot of the gallows. "The great eagle descended upon me, O All-Father," he said. "Its wings beat like thunder, its claws nearly tore me open. I bargained for my life. It demanded Idunn. I brought her to the forest. And the eagle seized her. A groan rose amongst the gods, not merely of anger, but of despair. But, continued Loki, I have every plan to rescue her. I will be leaving Asgard this very night. All I ask is the falcon cloak of Freya. Thor stepped forward, his great hand clamped around Loki's arm. With a strength that brooked no argument, he dragged the trickster outside the hall and hurled him against a stone pillar so hard it rang like a shield. You will fix what you have broken. Loki lifted his hands desperately. I am trying, dear brother. Odin approached, leaning heavily on Gungnir, now that age pulled harder at him. You will fly, he said. Take the falcon cloak of Freya. None fly swifter than she. Wear it, and you may slip into the giant's stronghold unseen. Freya stepped forward reluctantly, though her eyes still held bitterness. She unclasped the cloak from her shoulders, its feathers rippling like a living thing. Take it, she said, and pray you return with Idunn. Without her we wither, but I will make sure you are the first to go. Loki accepted it with a trembling hand, for this was no task set before him lightly. He knew Thiazi's strength, knew the fury that would follow should the giant return to find his prize missing. But he also knew there was no choice. If the gods fell, he would fall with them. Thus the trickster donned the falcon cloak. His bones shifted, feathers sprung from his arms, and the wind took hold of him. With the last look at the angry faces of gods, he leapt into the sky, cutting across the gathering dusk towards the frost-haunted realm of Jotunheim. He flew not for glory, not for honour, but because all of Asgard's fate now perched upon his narrow shoulders. There was the matter of his own fate too, of course, which perhaps was more important. The winds over the northern world were sharp. They clawed at Loki's feathers as he swept across the grey sky. Below him stretched the jagged spires of Jotunheim, its peaks rising like broken teeth. Snow whirled in relentless spirals, and Loki shuddered. Not his sort of place. The keen eyes of the falcon scanned the land. He knew Thiazi was no idle captor. The giant would have spells over his keep, wards forged from runes carved into ice older than the memories of man. But as he glided deeper into the realm, he saw no patrols, no circling beasts, no watchful eyes glittering from the cliffs. The silence was almost unsettling. But it was the silence of a hunter who had already taken everything he wanted. At last he spotted it, Thiazi's stronghold, carved into the face of a mountain. Its entrance, a great black mouth yawning wide. Loki folded his wings and swooped down, landing on a narrow ledge. The falcon cloak shimmered, feathers receding, as Loki took his own shape once more. He pressed himself into the stone shadows, listening. Deep inside the fortress came a faint rumble of a giant's laughter, and a woman's voice, weary, yet unbroken. Idunn. Loki forced himself forward. The tunnels twisted like the burrows of wolves, cold and slick beneath his feet. Frost flickered along the walls in patterns shaped like claws. But for all the dread that filled the passages, he found no guards, not a single Jotun. Thiazi, it seemed, trusted the remoteness of his hall and the helplessness of his prisoner. Loki slipped deeper until the rumbling grew clearer and torchlight flickered on the stone. He peered around the corner into a cavern lit by a great fireplace. There, seated on a throne carved of ice, lounged Thiazi, in his giant form. At his feet sat Idunn in her golden glow, her hands folded tightly around the wooden chest that contained her apples. Thiazi was speaking to her in a low voice, almost coaxingly. "You should take pride," he said. "The gods wither even now. Soon their strength will crumble, and I will bargain the apples for a power no Jotun has ever held." Idunn said nothing, but the defiance of her gaze shone brighter than any flame. She was far from broken. Loki's heart drummed against his ribs. Thiazi would not leave the chamber willingly, and Loki had no hope of facing the giant head-on. What he required was a moment, just one moment, while the giant turned his back. He watched. He waited. Soon Thiazi rose, stretching to his towering height. "Fetch wood for the fire," he commanded. "It burns too low." He turned and walked down the far tunnel, his heavy footsteps shaking snow from the ceiling. That was all Loki needed. He sprinted into the chamber, snatched the chest from Idunn's hand, and whispered, "Do not cry out. You are coming with me. I'm going to turn you into a nut." Surprise widened in Idunn's eyes, but before she could react, she clacked to the floor as a shiny brown walnut. Loki quickly donned the falcon cloak. Once more his bones reshaped, wings spread wide, and with a powerful leap he soared upwards towards a shaft of light that pierced the cavern roof like a spear, nut in claw. Loki shot from the fortress as fast as the magical cloak would let him, though before long his hubris, as it so often did, got the better of him. He slowed. There was no need to put in so much effort, and besides, the gods could wait, and the longer he took, the greater the story he could spin about overcoming so many giants. Loki, however, had not noticed the face at the window as he left. Skadi, daughter of Thiazi, had seen the falcon leave. She did not know what was wrong, but she knew that something was. She bellowed for her father, who came bounding up the stairs 3 at a time, to find out what was wrong. Skadi simply pointed at the tiny shape that was the retreating falcon. Thiazi sprinted to the hall, only to find it empty, and in a fit of pure rage, snatched up his own magical cloak of eagle's feathers, and with a roar that shook the mountain, shot after Loki. Loki heard the roar, and with a glance over his shoulder, beat his wings as hard as he could, now driven by pure terror. The chase had begun. And if Loki faltered for even a heartbeat, the giant would tear the both of them from the sky. The wind shrieked like a living thing as Loki drove his wings downwards again and again, each stroke burning through the muscles he had borrowed in the falcon form. He clung to Idunn in his claws, her weight only slight, yet the danger surrounding them made her feel as heavy as fate itself. Behind them came the thunder of wings. "Hold fast," Loki rasped, though the wind ripped most of his words away. The mountain peaks below knifed upwards, jagged and waiting. Loki skimmed close to them, darting left and right, trying to lose himself amongst the spires of ice and stone. But Thiazi followed with the certainty of shadow. No trick of the terrain would slow him. These were his lands, and he knew them too well. A blast of wind struck Loki from behind as the giant swooped closer. Talons the size of scythes snapped shut on empty air, missing Loki's tail feathers by a hair's width. Loki twisted violently, narrowly avoiding the cliff face that rushed up out of the fog. He felt the brush of sleet and the bite of the storm, and the heat of Thiazi's fury searing the air behind him. "You cannot outrun me, trickster!" the giant roared, a voice rolling like an avalanche against the mountains. "The apples are mine! Idunn is mine! The gods will wither, and their powers will fall to me." Loki banked hard and shot upwards, wings screaming with the effort. For a moment they burst free of the shadows of Jotunheim, soaring into a stretch of sky washed with a pale, cold sunlight. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then Thiazi burst upwards after them with a force that shattered the quiet. Snow blasted outwards in a white explosion as he climbed, closing the gap once more. The borders of the realm glittered ahead, the faint shimmer where the wild magic of Jotunheim softened into a steadier breath of Midgard and the distant strength of Asgard. Loki fixed his eyes on it. If he could just reach the edge, just cross the thin line of power, he might have a chance. But Thiazi was gaining. "I will not be caught again by this giant," Loki hissed through clenched teeth. "Not while I still draw breath." Down below, far ahead, the glimmer of gold broke through the haze. Asgard, and the gods were waiting. With his keen senses, Heimdall was watching the whole thing unfold, and was relaying the chase to the other gods. Only Tyr, the war god, had the right forethought and quickly hatched a plan. He instructed the other gods to gather wood and pitch and pile it up against one of the walls of Asgard, the one Loki would fly over. He poured the flammable pitch over the pyre, lit a torch, and waited. Loki folded his wings, suddenly plummeting into a controlled dive, putting space between him and the giant eagle. The world rushed upwards in a blur of white and grey. Thiazi followed, shrieking his rage. But this was the moment Loki had gambled for. As they streaked towards the border, the sun was just beginning to rise, straight into the eyes of Loki and Thiazi. There was no way for them to see the trap that Tyr had laid. Loki passed over the huge pile of wood a second before Thiazi did, but it was enough. Tyr threw his torch, and the huge pyre almost exploded, engulfing the giant eagle in it. The chase was ended. Thiazi had fallen. But my friends, this is not the end of the proceedings. Loki tried to pull up sharply, but ended up crashing into the ground. For a long moment, Loki could do nothing but pant. The falcon cloak slid from his shoulders like a tattered shadow. The gods rushed towards him, relief turning to anger in their faces. "How dare you return alone?" yelled Thor. Loki, continuing to pant, held up a finger. "Hold fast, Odin's son," he said, before releasing the magic he held on Idunn. She burst from the grass, filling the early morning darkness with her soft light. The gods, who had endured days without her apples, cried in relief, strength returning to their limbs, as though time itself was going backwards. Then their eyes turned on Loki, and cries were heard for what might his punishment be. Arguments went on through the whole day, but as night began to fall, a sound echoed through the hall that made the blood of every god run cold. It was the Yalahorn of Heimdall, the call to battle. The gods raced to the top of the walls of Asgard to see what was approaching. From the snowy reaches of the mountains strode Skadi, the daughter of Thiazi. Her steps sounded like stones cracking in the frost. She came armed for vengeance, bows slung across her shoulders, a quiver full of icy arrows at her hip. Her cloak was white as winter's breath, and her eyes were cold as starlight on frozen water. She halted before the gates of Asgard, and her voice rang clear as the snap of ice on the river's edge. "I come for justice," she said simply, "for the life of my father lost by your hands." There was no malice here. Simply the truth, plain and simple. Odin stepped forward first, for it was his place to speak when the balance between gods and giants trembled. His spear gleamed in his hand, and his voice was measured and grave, though the weariness still clung to him. "Skadi," he said, "daughter of Thiazi, we know the sorrow that drives you here. Your father came to us with wrath, and fate met him at our gates. If justice is what you seek, it shall be meted in truth, not in needless blood." Skadi's bow remained in her grip unlowered. "My father was slain," she answered, "and no words will warm the emptiness he has left. I seek recompense that will match the weight of my loss." The gods murmured amongst themselves. They were all still quite weak, and none wished to spill more blood. Yet neither could they dismiss the rightful claim of a grieving daughter. At last, Odin nodded slowly. "Then come within the walls of Asgard," he said, "and let your claim be heard. If a price must be paid, we will look to pay it." Skadi entered, and the air seemed to chill around her. She stood tall amongst the gathered Aesir, unbound by their strength and by their power. Odin spoke again. "Name the recompense you desire." Skadi's gaze swept over them, sharp as the winter's wind. "Give me laughter to ease the bitterness in my heart," she said. "Give me a husband worthy of my strength and that of my father, and let the eyes of my father look upon the world in remembrance of what has been done." The gods exchanged glances, for these were heavy demands, some more so than others, though they were not impossible. First came the matter of laughter. Skadi stood with arms folded as the gods brought forth jesters, acrobats, and every manner of trickster they could summon. Yet none could coax even the curl of a smile from her. At last they turned to Loki, who remained untried. Grumbling, Loki agreed. He didn't have a choice, and he knew it. He was not on good terms with the gods in this moment. He tied one end of a rope around his beard, and the other to the beard of a wild goat in an attempt to have a sort of tug of war. However, Thor, who was always looking to mess with Loki, and was not in a particularly good mood, allowed a small rumble of thunder to echo through the hall. This was enough to turn Loki's head for a moment, and also to scare the poor goat. The goat bleated and leapt, jerking violently away from Loki, dragging him face first across the courtyard in a spectacle so ridiculous that even the stern faces of the gods cracked into grins. At last, Loki was deposited against the feet of Skadi with a loud yelp as half of his beard was torn out. The sound broke from her then, sharp, sudden, unwilling at first. Yet laughter it clearly was, clear and bright, and the first of her demands was met. Next came the choosing of a husband. Skadi had been looking forward to this, as she had spotted Baldur, and there was a reason he was known to many as Baldur the Beautiful. She was on the point of claiming him when Odin decreed she must choose amongst the gods as she pleased, but only by the sight of their feet. Odin knew that Baldur was the obvious choice, but also that the gods would not be happy to have him whisked off to Jotunheim. All the eligible gods, and some not so eligible, stood behind a curtain, and Skadi was shown into the room. She walked the line slowly, her eyes narrowed. When she came upon a pair of feet with the fairest skin of them all, she stopped at once, believing them to belong to Baldur. She pointed. "This one," she said. "This shall be my husband." But when the curtain was drawn back, it was Njord, the god of the sea and the calm shore, who stepped forward. Though not the husband she had sought, the vow was made, for the gods could not break their own bargains without destroying the order that bound the world. Besides, he was still a god, and fair enough for anyone. Last of all came the matter of Thiazi's death. The gods agreed that his eyes would be set amongst the heavens as bright stars, that Skadi might look upon them and remember him without bitterness. There they glinted, pinpricks of cold fire in the night sky, honouring the fallen giant in the only way that could ease the sting of his passing. Thus ended the trial that followed Thiazi's death, and with that, my friends, I grow weary, and bid you good night.